Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in today for Kirby Anderson, and I am excited about the show we have for you today. We're going to start out in this first hour talking about Christians and their role in politics. To what extent should they be engaged, and how can they have an impact on politics? Joining me in studio today, Bunni Pounds. She is founder and president of Christians Engaged, which is a new organization we're going to explain in just a minute. Bunni, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And with me, Trayce Bradford. She is vice president of Christians Engaged, and she's going to be here in studio also, and we're going to talk about what is Christians Engaged. Now, we have both of you have had some involvement in Christianity and politics for some time. Bunni, yes. You were the campaign manager for Jeb Hensarling, Congressman Jeb Hensarling. I would argue one of our best congressmen we have ever seen. He retired from that. I hope it's not the last we will see of him. But give us a little bit of your background now with in politics and how you've been involved. And, of course, when Jeb stepped down from that, you ran for his seat.
Yeah, thank you, Merrill. It's so great to be here on Point of View. We love this radio show and love what Marlon Maddox and everybody has done through the years for the Christian community. So, yeah, I'm a pastor's kid, grew up in the church, had a radical salvation, in my early teens and just fell in love with Jesus. And, started a couple companies with my husband, went on the mission field for a while and ended up in politics at the age of 32 and spent 10 years of my life as the campaign manager for Congressman Jeb Hensarling. Mm-hmm. Then started my own firm, kind of being the fundraiser for the North Texas Conservatives, which was such a thrilling adventure of being an entrepreneur again.
And you were fairly successful at that.
Yes, it was fun. Had 9 people in my employment and 32 clients at one point. It was chaotic. And then, of course, my boss of 10 years announces his retirement, and I couldn't find a candidate that I thought would, fulfill what needed to happen in the district. So I ran myself, was honored to be the only person in the United States endorsed by the vice president in 2018 in the primary, and outraised all my brothers around the state. But we came up slightly short against a state representative who we're now actually friends and I'm supporting. So, it's been an adventure of learning how to be a believer for the last 12 years in this field. Mm-hmm. And so, me and Trayce have been friends. Was her consultant for Texas Eagle Forum for the last 4 years as well. And we just started having a vision for how do we connect the dots with Christians.
And Trayce, you were involved in Eagle Forum for quite some time, right? And that was that sort of your introduction to the political realm?
Yes, sir. I've always had a passion for government and policy, but wanting to be involved. Now, I was a homeschool mother with 7 children. And
that's a full-time job, isn't it?
Exactly. And,
still homeschooling, by the way.
Age 30 to 11. So we've been homeschooling for quite some time. But, it was interesting the timing that God had to, I believe, pull me in. And there was a dear friend that invited me to an Eagle Forum meeting. And I took one of my kids with me, and we left there, and it was like, I've got to find a way to be able to stay involved. And my husband and kids have helped me this whole time. And it just went from there to Dallas Eagle Forum and then to Texas Eagle Forum. So I've really appreciated the adventure that I've been able to have with this.
Now you two are starting a group called Christians Engaged. Its real launch date is not till Wednesday, so we're getting a preview.
You are.
You listeners are getting a preview of what won't be really out there until Wednesday. We actually have a link on pointofview.net to the website, so they work to get that thing up and running, so you can go there and find out more about it. And you've got a video you're going to release on Wednesday. I've had a peek at that video, so you want to keep that bookmark Christians Engaged on your computer so that you can go there Wednesday and look at the video and see how they explain what they're going to do. But we're going to also talk about that now. So, Bunny, why Christians Engaged? Why the name? Why did you start the organization?
Yeah. Well, we've, when I was running for Congress, I spoke in 16 churches in the 5th Congressional District, and there was just a lot of people that were not educated on what is a primary, when are the dates, why, there's not a history within the Christian community of actually voting in every election. So, in a runoff, we have a 40% drop off, and we had a huge drop off. If all the churches had showed up that I'd spoken at during the primary, the story of my district and my story would have been different, but they didn't. And so the reality is there's a disconnect between what we think about how we connect with God as it relates to our government, how we connect the dots as form of showing up at the polls, and then also that we're not connecting the dots with our own heart and engaging with the culture. So those three things just kept coming up to me and Tracy. They're very central parts of our life. So how to move the needle in a comprehensive way to get people to pray, to commit to pray for 5 minutes a week for their nation or their elected officials, to commit, to pledge, to vote in every election, even your city election, your primary runoff election, your constitutional amendment elections here in Texas. And then also to engage your heart somewhere in the war. That can be in the pro-life community. That can be advocating for legislation down in Austin. That can be getting to know your member of Congress, but, connect your heart somewhere in the fight. Don't just sit on your couch and watch Netflix all day.
Tracy, how do you intend to achieve that goal?
The thing that we've talked about is it is a heart connection. And we felt very strongly that we have to go out and be where those people are. We've already connected with friends who are going to have us in their homes to reach out to the friends they have. One thing that struck me that I felt was really important, and we agreed right at the beginning of this, we keep going to the same pool and pulling from the same people over and over. And a lot of them get weary and just fade. Yes. But the problem is there are millions sitting in the pews. There are people sitting there and they just don't know what to do. And that's where we're just whatever we have to do. If it's we went to the fall harvest in Cleburne. There was a little Frontier Days. Yeah. And we had a great time there. And it's being where they are and just getting into conversations. And the best part of those days, we're sitting there and talking to people who were really just like us and just didn't know what to do. And hey, here's what we're offering. And they were really excited. They're like, we want to get you to talk to our pastor. That's what everybody's response is. It's been real interesting. Or they say, I can't do anything, but I can pray. I'm like, well, that's doing something. And I can tell my pastor, I'm like, that's a first step. That is getting engaged. I think sometimes people think, well, if they're not doing this, then they're not going to be engaged. And the sad part of that is they just stop. They won't go any further.
My guests for this hour are Bunni Pounds and Trayce Bradford. They are founder and president, Bunni is, vice president, Tracy, of Christians Engaged, a new organization intended to try to get Christians engaged in the political process so that they can have an impact in that and make a difference on elections and the way the country's going. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of how Christians have been engaged, and we'll see where Christians Engaged is going to go. Stay with us.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Every time Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg enters a hospital, speculation surfaces concerning her health and future. She is a cancer survivor who has occasionally missed oral arguments. But she isn't about to step down because she and other liberals fear who would replace her. But there may be a reasonable solution to how presidents appoint justices to the Supreme Court. Perhaps it is time to consider term limits for the Supreme Court. Even though that sounds controversial, this might actually be a solution that garners bipartisan support. In a recent column, John Fund makes the case for term limits on the Supreme Court. When the Founding Fathers granted life tenure to Supreme Court justices, the average life expectancy was 38. Today it is more than twice that. Some of the justices in the past certainly stayed past their sell-by date. He argues that the Constitution in Article 3, Section 1 does say that judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean that they must serve for life. In fact, many federal judges retire on a fairly regular basis. The reform group, Fix the Court, has come up with a bipartisan proposal for 18-year term limits for the Supreme Court. It would stagger the terms so that a vacancy could come up every 2 years. That means every president could have 2 appointments in each term. One poll found that 6 in 10 registered voters favored Supreme Court term limits. Chief Justice John Roberts, appointed by George W. Bush, as well as Justice Stephen Breyer, appointed by Bill Clinton, have indicated support for the idea. This is a proposal worth debating. It will provide a more orderly transition for the Supreme Court and possibly lower the heat in the current confirmation battles. I think this is one proposal that might actually attract bipartisan support. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in studio today is Bunni Pounds and Trayce Bradford, President and Vice President, respectively, of a new organization called Christians Engaged. And I like the name because it sounds like it's got action in there. Yes. Engaged. It's different than Christian Coalition, which sounds like we're a group. This sounds like we're doing something. But let's talk a little bit about the history. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, Reverend Jerry Falwell, created the Moral Majority. That started having an impact on elections around the country. In the late 80s, after Pat Robertson lost his presidential bid, he created the Christian Coalition, I think in about 1989, hired a guy named Ralph Reed to run that thing. The Christian Coalition became one of the most effective Christian-oriented organizations in Washington. I still remember back in 1997, Congress was looking at passing what became called the Children's Health Insurance Plan. We had some concerns about it, and we were going around talking to members of Congress about it. And one of the things they would say is, well, have you checked with Ralph Reed and the Christian Coalition?
Wow.
Members of Congress said, you need to go check with them and find out where they are on this before I take a position on it, because they didn't want to get on the wrong side of Ralph Reed and the Christian Coalition. And that was just, I think that 97 was sort of the height of the Christian Coalition's influence, because Ralph Reed, I believe, left shortly thereafter. But it at one point, it was a major factor in legislation in Washington. And then, of course, Eagle Forum, and you've both been involved in Eagle Forum. That same year, we had Phyllis Schlafly in. We did a briefing on the Hill on this Children's Health Insurance Plan. Phyllis Schlafly came in to speak about it, and this is a room in Congress. You can present presentations and so forth there. So we had a panel discussion. We had Phyllis in there, and the room was packed. It was standing room only. Most people there were wanting to see what Phyllis had to say about the children's health insurance plan. So going back a ways, Christians have been really involved in this, but my own sense is I just don't see any organization as effective as they used to be 15, 20 years ago. Bunny, would you agree with that?
I think we need new organizations for new generation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, after my race, I sat on my couch for a week and read my Bible and read a history book called The Evangelicals. And it was the history from all the way from the beginning through the first Great Awakening, the second Great Awakening, all the way to, you know, Trump's election and the effect that the churches had on American politics. And I just started crying out to God, God, where is the voices that are connecting with people that are being awakened in the pews? Because I do believe there's an awakening happening in America. And I think we're going to see that even more as we go into 2020. God uses fear sometimes to connect us to action. Mm-hmm. And we as believers are the ones that should have all wisdom and discernment, and we should be connected with God, right? So as we see things on Fox News or we see things on, you know, that we know is not right, we have a responsibility to react to that and turn it into prayers, into action. And so I was crying out for that, and just this vision started coming together. And what we're doing is providing accountability to Christians. You have something in your heart that wants to pray. You have something in your heart that really understands that you should be voting in every election. You have something in your heart that wants to engage. By taking our pledge and helping us mentor you in that process, we will hold you accountable. We will educate you, and we'll help you discern what you need to do as believers. So we believe we're marketing towards millennials and the younger generation of Christians that need that, you know, that need connection points, and that's what we're trying to provide. And I believe that's what needs to happen in this day.
You know, prior to let's say the 1960s, to pick a date, there was sort of a general worldview in the country. Not everyone was Christians, but there was a general worldview that sort of prevailed. God existed. It was fine to pray in public, at school, and other places. Certain things were just not accepted and not appropriate, even if people didn't always live up to those. But you had that sort of general worldview that was widely shared among Christians and nominal Christians and even non-Christians. That has gone away, it seems like. We're in a world where there's a lot of views out there that are not just incompatible with Christianity, but actually attacking Christian worldviews. Does that sort of open up the door to say this is one of the reasons we have got to be engaged, because the culture is going in a different direction now?
Well, it's ours to steward, and there's been an absence of the body of Christ stewarding, whether
Right.
that's because you believe we should not be involved in that horrible, corrupt politics,
Mm-hmm.
or you're afraid and you don't know what to do, or you're apathetic. But we're the ones that were given the job to steward. And I know, do we really want, what we're seeing is because we didn't do that, we had rights that are now being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having to go spend time, money, effort to get those back. That's not being a good steward.
Mm-hmm.
We are actually losing things that we were already holding. And so I think I do believe people are starting to feel uncomfortable. I do believe we've got a generation or more younger that need an invitation. I have children in that age bracket, but also just working with millennials and even the groups that are coming under that. It's like they want to be invited into things. It's very interesting. Even at work, their names are different. They don't like the levels. And it's just really, we're watching a culture change right before our eyes. You say, you know, it's not that acceptable. My son came in, I was watching an old 40s movie, Christmas movie, and he goes, this is just sweet. I was like, yeah. When you go to your exercise class and you're afraid to be overheard talking about how you support something that might upset someone, I've really never been afraid to express my opinion. But I find myself going, do I really want to deal with the hassle? And we've got to face the facts. We let it go, and now we need to stand up and take it back. And we can do that with authority, and we can do it with the love of Christ.
Is the goal to just get good people elected, or is it to set out a certain agenda along the line that has to do with whether you're talking about taxes, gender identity, ethics, marriage, divorce, prayer in school? Are you just trying to get good people elected so that they make good choices, or do you actually have an agenda you'd like to see moved?
Well, we're a Christian, nonpartisan nonprofit, and so we're going to be educating people on how the Bible informs the issues of our day, and we're going to try to take it back to the Bible. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about issues. We're going to be writing articles on our blog, but we don't have a specific agenda other than to teach and mentor Christians to go to the Bible and find the answers that they need to inform their decisions. You know, we hear a lot of times people are picking, you have to pick the lesser of two evils in an election. You know, we saw that sometimes, you know, in 2016 and Christians struggling with those decisions. Well, how do we make those decisions? How do we look at people's lives and records and what they say and really discern how we should vote? Because we do have a responsibility. Mm-hmm. In my race, again, I'm supporting my opponent. Now he's got an amazing record in Washington, but in my race, you would have seen, if you had spent 5 minutes looking at both of our websites, you would have seen Bunny is endorsed by the vice president, Bunny is endorsed by Ted Cruz, Bunny is endorsed by every conservative legislator in the district, 1,000 activists and donors in the district that are connected to the party. And you would have seen he was endorsed by 5 mayors. And you could have seen that I had actual policy stuff on my website, and he had a couple sentences. Again, that's just basic 5 minutes of research that people, and I use that with all respect to my previous opponent, but with all the reality is you could spend 5 minutes looking at those 2 websites and have enough information to go make an informed decision. But we don't even spend that kind of time doing that.
Yeah, no, we don't. This has been a problem with Christians for some time, is they simply just don't go and take the time to do that. And I think, and of course, one of the things Christian Coalition did was create a voter's guide. They ended up getting in trouble creating the voter's guide, but they created a voter's guide to try to give some kind of awareness to say, if you're concerned about this issue, here are where the candidates stand. If you're concerned about this issue, this is where the candidates stand. But it was effective for a while.
Yes.
And if for those who are not going to get terribly engaged, they probably do need something which says, these are the people who endorsed me. That tells you something. Here's an issue or a candidate's guide that tells you something. So when we come back, let's talk a little bit about what we think you can achieve with this, and whether or not you're going to be involved in social issues solely, or is it going to be economic and other issues? Yes. So stay with us. We'll be back with Bunni Pounds and Trayce Bradford in just a minute.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson today, and we are talking Christian engagement in the political and cultural world with Bunni Pounds, founder of Christians Engaged, and Trayce Bradford, the vice president of Christians Engaged. This is going to be, they'll have their formal opening a release on Wednesday, just 2 days from today, but their website is already up and available. So if you go to pointofview.net, you can click on a link to their website and begin to get some information from that. And in 2 days on Wednesday, they'll have a video up. I've seen it. It's a great video explaining what they're doing and why. So, Bunni, the groups like the Moral Majority, Christian Coalition, they got involved in a range of different issues. Mm-hmm. Are you going to be primarily focused on social issues, or will you be focused on economic and fiscal issues as well, you think?
We're going to be focused on all of it. I believe the Bible informs, again, all of those choices that we make when it comes to policy. And you can see throughout the scriptures about debt and what that means. And I don't think the Bible holds government exempt from that. Mm-hmm. So, when you bring up the numbers to people of what their city, state, and federal government is doing as it regards to debt, we brought up the national debt to a church in Wichita Falls a few weeks ago, and then I let them know that the city of Wichita Falls has $164 million in debt, and their jaw kind of fell down, right? It was like, wow, okay, this is an issue. So whether it's human trafficking, whether it's debt, whether it's the life issue, whether it's the marriage issue, gender identification issues, there's so many issues that the Bible informs that Christians can use their discernment on.
So Trayce, I'm with a think tank, and we produce content. That's kind of what I do. I write, I publish in articles, The Hill, Forbes, other places. We publish studies at times and so forth. So we create content for others to be able to use. Are you going to be a content creator, or are you going to be more of a do tank, which you're trying to just get things done?
I think the fun part of this for us is we will be sharing our blogs, where that's coming more from how we see praying, engaging, are the issues. But what we really want to do is partner with groups like yours and be able to get people engaged. One of the things that we find, or I found even with Eagle Forum, is over and over, you have people saying, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. Or a speaker would come in and they'd be just like they'd been hit with a truck. There's so much. What we're hoping to do is to be able to either have those conversations or be able to, through even some of our own blogging, I think we can say, there's a group we've worked with and this was something we saw them do, and pass them on or make that connection. I keep hearing the word when I think about this, like a clearinghouse. Like, we have been connected to so many different groups around the state that do such great work. Mm-hmm. And so why recreate the wheel? And if we go back to the fact we've got millions of people sitting and they are not voting, they're not engaged, there's plenty to go around. So we really do want to lock arms. I think that's going to be way more effective.
Your point, I think, is very well taken, because when I talk to groups, you oftentimes see they want to be engaged, but policy issues and things like that can become so complicated so quickly that people just, their eyes glaze over and they just point me in the right direction, because this is more than I have time or the desire to sort of weed through these things and figure out what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Or they don't want to do it wrong.
They don't want to do it wrong.
They don't want to get it wrong. And this is what's encouraging to me, because you find, I've seen where you take someone who said, I can't do this. And we were down at the Capitol and we literally had to pull her out of the offices by the end of the day. She got so excited because it just took one or two to get over that fear. And I believe there's so many people sitting there that have a heart to do something. And we are here. I always tell my kids, you're here to make a change. You're going to change the world. You're going to change it by your action or by your inaction. But your life here will impact.
Us politicos, we think that everybody understands everything that we understand, right? And we don't understand that people don't understand what a precinct is or
That's
what
right.
a primary election is or early voting or
So this is education. Will you be doing education
yes,
then?
will be practical education and action points for people to take action. So we're going to just continue to give them action items and connecting them. So if there's somebody here in Texas, like we have iVoter Guide, we'll be connecting them to iVoter Guide. We'll be connecting them to biblical civics classes. We will be providing the practical education and then pushing people into the trenches of getting engaged. So, if they want to learn how to look at two-party platforms and figure out which aligns with their values, how to read basic documents, how to go down and advocate for a bill in Austin. There's how to walk beside their elected official and be friends and be a citizen lobbyist as a Christian. Just kind of the basic things that we all know, but, we need to reproduce. And then millennials, they want to be on mission. So everything that we're doing is action focused. We're creating an organization that's not sitting in meetings, though meetings are so good, but we are going to be.
I don't know I'd go that far.
We are going to be
stretch.
we are going to be on an adventure of talking to Christians, engaging, being mentored, being kind of discipled in this engagement process. And so everything we do, whether it's a group in Collin County, will be all around mentoring, discipling, and engaging more Christians. And so they're actively learning from the older ones that have been around for a long time.
So let me take the critic's role. We live in a state and in a country where there's a separation between church and state, and that's been very, very helpful. Aren't you sort of going over that and trying to push Christians to be involved in politics when we should really sort of keep our religion to ourselves and keep that separation?
Good question. Well, the Johnson Amendment is pretty much just a piece of paper. It's never been enforced. The reality is it was keeping the government from affecting the church. That was what really separation of church and state was. But we have let all this fear come in, specifically pastors that don't realize even their power as a citizen to engage. The Lord calls us to talk about the issues that the Bible talks about. And I think, again, the Bible informs our policy decisions, and believers in Christ should be speaking on that and engaging with those issues.
But politics requires compromise. Are you not creating a situation in which Christians step in and sometimes have to compromise their values on things that they say, I support this bill and I think it'd be very helpful? Member of Congress, I agree with you there. If you'll support my bill, then I'll support your bill. But I don't support your bill. But if you want your bill coming through, you need to support mine. But I disagree with what you're doing. But if you want your bill going through, you've got to support mine. Okay, I'll compromise.
I think there's a difference between politics and your relationship with Christ. And we sometimes move all of that, like we hear over and over. I mean, I can't tell you how many times it's been said to me, well, I don't think Christians should get involved in politics. Well, politics is involved with you, and you can't escape it. And the government is involved with you. So wouldn't you rather have a voice? I think to get involved and having been involved and having to, on a much lesser level than a state official or an elected official, having to wrestle in my heart on issues, there's always the clear-cut place to go back to. And if you can't look yourself in the face, in the mirror, and you can't say, I know what I believe, I know what I stand on, and I'm going to trust, because I stick to that we're going to get through this. And when you compromise, you won't. You may get the short-term effect that you're looking for, but in the end, you're going to deviate from where you need to be. Working together and compromising, to me, maybe it's a word thing here, but those are two different things.
So Christians Engaged, will they support specific legislation? You're going to be a nonprofit, but that a 501c3 cannot support specific legislation,
right.
But a C4 can. Are you going to be a C3 or C4? Are you going to support?
We are a C3. We do have a C4 set up, but we are still working on what that process is going to be and what we're going to use it for. But the reality is, no, we're not going to be advocating specific candidates, political parties, or legislation, but we're going to be educating the average believer and kind of connecting them to the resources that they need. And the last thing I'll say on the compromise thing is, as my former boss used to say, you can always compromise policies if you don't compromise your principles.
Mm-hmm.
There's always, anytime there's gray areas, right, we have to go, okay, what is really the bottom line issue? In Texas, we can compromise little shades to try to protect the unborn, right? Mm-hmm. Which we've been very successful in making it harder and harder in the state of Texas for abortion. And we've seen that as a gradual thing. The left's very good at that, but sometimes we on the right are not so good at that.
When we come back for our last segment, we'll wrap it up here and find out where they think we should be going. Stay with us.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to our final segment with Bunni Pounds and Trayce Bradford of Christians Engaged. Bunni, you mentioned earlier that after you failed in the primary to win that nomination to be the Republican candidate, you said you began asking what was happening to you. I mean, you began to sort of self-evaluation. Were other people reaching out to you to say, to give you some inspiration for Christians Engaged?
Well, for the last year and a half, we've been bouncing ideas off of people, some very influential people. One of them said, Bunni, you've got to think like a political scientist, not just as a minister. Congressman Michael Cloud, who I consult with down in Victoria, Corpus Christi, when he heard about the idea, he said, we can't just push Christians to the polls. We have to educate them because a lot of young people don't even know what their values are. So we had strategic conversations like that. And really it's just bringing people to the motivation of, like Congressman Cloud, let's use him as an example. He was a media director at his church at Faith Family Church in Victoria. About 10 years started getting involved and became the Young Republicans leader, and then ran for chairman of the party, and then and then he decided to run for Congress, and he got elected. So we never know where that prayer, voting, and engagement is going to lead. Another story is a young man on our board. He's a bank president here in Texas. He's an attorney. He calls me after the last election and says, Bunny, why is there no one on the judicial ballots in Dallas County? Why do we not have any alternatives? And I said, well, we couldn't find any candidates. So he kept hounding me this last couple of years, and he got on my candidate recruitment committee. And then we had spoke to attorneys all over the county, and nobody would run. So guess who's going on the ballot today? Him and his wife to run for judicial positions in Dallas County. So we never know where our path is going to lead. If you join your heart at some point, if you connect at some point, God has a sneaky way of moving you down the line to way farther than you thought you wanted to go, but exactly where you need to be to impact the culture.
Tracey, were you just talking with Bunny during these times and having the same sort of feeling that something need to be done?
We were. There was a very specific conversation we had in my dining room. We saw the need for something different, and we weren't sure exactly what that was going to look like. And I think in talking to people, again, you see people, they want to blend their faith with action. They just weren't sure how. And she calls me one day, we need to meet, and she starts laying this stuff out, and she goes, let's go. We're going to do it. I'm like, okay. And I'm ready. And I was the president at Texas Eagle Forum, and I did love that responsibility, but I knew, and this is speaking to...
And you're not president right now?
No, I went ahead. I really felt God putting it on my heart, and my husband felt the same thing, that it was time to step away. And it was a great opportunity, and I appreciate them and what they do and where they serve. I think that's something that's so critical, as we realize there are seasons and there are also places, so that there are places for a Christian Engaged to come up and stand next to other groups and say, we're hearing people say it at the basic level. What do you mean? What's a platform? What's a precinct? What? And we have more than one election than every 4 years for president. I mean, there are, seriously, you can watch the audience when you're talking to them, and they're kind of looking at you. And I having been in front of people before, I think what I really have noticed when we talk about this, people lean in. It's like it's being made simple, and it's being made almost like a conversation versus someone just teaching you something or kind of throwing something at you. It's a heart connection. And I will say that prayer, to me, undergirds everything, and we believe that here too. And
everything.
What we did all through Eagle Forum even was we would pray with our officials, we would pray with their families. It didn't matter. And that's why the crux of this, as soon as she said, we're going to do pray, then we're going to take the action of voting, which is, I believe Christians, and I said this the other day, should run, not walk to the voting booth. We get to say, we get to voice what we want in leading this country. And then on top of all that, you can go get plugged in somewhere to actually, who knows, maybe you can end up running for Congress.
Do what's in your heart.
Maybe you end up being somebody that makes prayer calls from your house. Who knows? But there's just an endless, I think that's what I'm so joyful about this, because my kids are like, Mom, you really are fired up.
And I'll add one last thing, Buddy, is that, we see that people need to be more attached at a heart level than just an email list. It's not just about a first name, last name, and an email. You're now a member of something. We have to be connected to one another. And so what we're doing is all missions focused, where we're going out as groups in congressional districts throughout the state of Texas, organizing teams of young people with older people that have great wisdom, and seeing it kind of an organic movement of Christians walking together at the same time, we're pulling people to take the pledge, which you can do on our website, to pray, vote, and engage. And that beginning action then gives us an open door to start educating and connecting you elsewhere.
So you mentioned Texas. You're starting out just as a Texas organization. Is that correct?
We are.
Is there a vision to say if we may be able to expand to other states, or if other states are interested in what we're doing, they contact us? Is there
Absolutely. Yeah. No, we want to start as a Texas model. We believe where we are in 2020 is imperative that we start now. But yeah, we would love to see this go around the country. I've had dreams of that. I know Tracy has too.
And one thing that we both agreed on is it's pushing people past where we are. We're not building a kingdom behind us. We're really trying to push people forward and fly. Keep moving and keep motivating people to move out. It's not about building something up. We really do. As soon as we could replace ourselves in a sense and replicate and get people going and voting and active, that's wonderful. That's what we're looking for.
And what you'll see from us is videos and, lots of voices. Man, if we could see 5,000 voices come out of the state of Texas of people that have something to say from a Christian perspective, that's what we want. It's not just about me and Tracy's voices. You're going to see a lot of videos from a lot of people.
And the point you were trying to make earlier, at least with respect to your campaign, if Christians were engaged, they would make a huge difference, because many of them, I guess, feel like that's just not something they should or want to be involved in.
Yeah, it goes way beyond even voter registration. If I had gone into that church and I'd had my pledge that we have created, I would have then sent reminders out to those people that it's time to vote at the primary. So what we're doing is a heart connection. They're saying, yes, I will take the pledge. I understand that I have this need in my life. And then they're asking us to hold them accountable, educate them, and keep them moving down the process of whatever God calls them to do as it relates to these issues.
We spent this past hour talking with Bunni Pounds, who's founder and president of Christians Engaged, and Trayce Bradford, who is the vice president of Christians Engaged. They've started a new organization, Christians Engaged, and we have that information on the website at pointofview.net, but it's christiansengaged.org, is that right?
.org, right.
christiansengaged.org. So if you want to find out more about them, you can go to that website, christiansengaged.org. It is up live now. It wasn't going to be up until Wednesday, but
it's secret, just for Point of View listeners.
We got it up early, so nobody else knows about it but us. They'll have a video up there on Wednesday that will sort of explain what they're doing. And if you want to know more about Christians Engaged, you can reach out to them through the website, I assume, and they'll have contact information. You can reach out to Bunni or Tracy, find out a little bit more about what they're doing, and maybe get involved yourself. It is one of the critical issues of our time as our culture begins its massive drift away from Christian principles. When we come back, we're going to be talking about tax issues. It is end of the year, and you'll need to know what to do about your taxes. So Dan Pilla will be with us by phone. Stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. I'm with the Institute for Policy Innovation, and we just spent the last hour talking about Christians Engaged, a major new organization that has been created by Bunni Pounds and Trayce Bradford in order to try to reach out to Christians around the state initially, and then to other states eventually. Hopefully, if it does well, we're hopeful for that. We're also wanting to talk about tax issues this hour. We are at the end of the year, and the end of the year is going to be a time that we're going to have to talk about those taxes and make sure that we've got them ready to go. There's a lot of things that you can that people engage in order to try to make sure that they are paying all their legal taxes, but not any more than they have to pay. And that is a key aspect that we want to make sure that you're doing. We're going to try to have Dan Pilla on the air here in just a minute. Dan has published in his newsletter 9 principles that people should be considering for at the end of the year tax purposes. And we're going to walk through some of those, and if we get Dan on here in just a minute, we'll have him discuss that more. But I'll begin walking through some of these right now, and then you can begin to consider whether or not you are paying attention to that and doing it. Tax issues are extremely important for us, and we want to make sure you're doing the right things on that. So of his end-of-the-year tax planning, he's got what he calls 9 simple steps. We actually have these available on Point of View website, pointofview.net. So if you want to go through those, you're certainly welcome to go click onto that link, and you'll see those that he addresses. The first one he has there is considering paying state income taxes before December 31st. This is something that we in Texas don't have to worry about too much because we don't have state income tax, but most states do have a state income tax. And the point he wants to make there is that if you're going to pay those, many times people wait until the next year to pay their state income tax. But if they do that, they can't take it on that previous year. So if you're in a state with state income tax and you're trying to, you're thinking about, well, I need to pay those taxes, and you haven't done it yet, you may want to pay it before the end of the year. If you wait until April 15 of 2020 to pay those 2019 taxes, you can take that on your 2020 income tax form, but not one for this year. So you want to pay attention to that. I think maybe we have Dan on with us now. Dan, are you with us? Dan?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. This is Dan Pilla. Dan, you've been involved in taxes for what, 30 years now, I think, haven't you? Maybe more?
It's north of 40 years, actually, Merrill. I've been doing this work since my father got in trouble with the IRS. He had a small business here in St. Paul, Minnesota, got behind on his employees withholding taxes, and in 1974, the IRS shut him down. They padlocked the doors. They auctioned his equipment off for a couple cents on the dollar. And then in 1978, They turned their attention to our family home and tried to seize and sell it for the back tax liability, and that's when I got started. I'm fumbling around trying to find a way to solve the problem, and that's how I got involved in the tax resolution business.
A life-changing motivation.
Yeah, no question.
Well, I go back. I remember back in the 90s, since I've been sort of associated off and on with Point of View from back in the early 90s, and my recollection is Marlon used to have you on back in the 90s talking about tax issues. So you've had a record with Point of View for a number of years, and of course
a very long time. The first show I did with Marlon was in about 1989.
Oh.
And I did shows with Marlon nonstop all the way up through the time that he passed.
Yes.
God rest his soul.
Well, of course, we are coming to the end of the year here, and people need to know what they need to be aware of, what they should be just have on their radar for tax issues. And I've pointed out already that you've got a newsletter out, and you mentioned in there the end of the year tax planning, 9 simple steps that can cut taxes and pain, and that's taxes and pain sort of go hand in hand. So people can go to pointofview.net and look at that. But let's walk through some of these. You say consider paying state income taxes before December 31st. Now, Texas, where Point of View's based, we don't have a state income tax, but about 42 or 43 states do. What should people consider on that?
Well, what I like to do is get the deduction as quickly as you can in the year that you pay the expense. And people generally will pay their federal income taxes, if they owe any, are going to pay the federal income taxes in March or April when they file their tax returns. Sometimes if they're on an extension, they won't pay it until October. But that's the time they'll pay their state income taxes as well. But if you pay your 2019 state income taxes in 2020, you don't get a deduction until you file the 2020 tax return, which is another year later. Whereas if you accelerate the payment into 2019, in other words, pay it before the end of the year, you're going to get a deduction for that payment in 2019. You don't have to wait a year to get it. So basically what you want to do is look at your situation and see if you need the additional tax deductions, and then you can pay it now. You also have to keep in mind, though, that under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, your state and local tax deduction is capped at $10,000. So you don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're paying taxes that you're not going to get a deduction for because you're over the cap.
Do most states have a withholding tax for state income taxes as we do with federal income taxes?
Yeah, absolutely they do. And in fact, that's the reason why about 75 to 80% of all taxpayers get a tax refund, because they've over-withheld. And it's only basically the self-employed folks, not only, but largely the component of those that pay their taxes actually have to write a check to the IRS or the state are self-employed people, which is, one of the reasons why it's so important for self-employed folks to understand how their estimated tax system works. And that's one of the things that I talk about in my list as well.
Yeah. We're talking,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we need to close out this segment. Well, we're talking with Dan Pilla, taxpayer advocate extraordinaire with 40 years plus worth of expertise in this field, and we're going through his 9 principles that people need to consider about taxes at the end of the year. And once we go through some of these that you as individuals, we're going to talk a little bit about the small business tax people. Small businesses. Dan has a new Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide out, where he highlights a number of things that small businesses need to be considering in the tax field. It is if you think your individual taxes are complicated, wait till you run a business, and there's a lot of small business entrepreneurs out there who face that issue. So when we come back, we're going to look more at these 9 principles, and then we'll get to talking about Small Business Tax Guide. So stay with us, and we'll be back with Dan Pilla in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Every time Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg enters a hospital, speculation surfaces concerning her health and future. She is a cancer survivor who has occasionally missed oral arguments. But she isn't about to step down because she and other liberals fear who would replace her. But there may be a reasonable solution to how presidents appoint justices to the Supreme Court. Perhaps it is time to consider term limits for the Supreme Court. Even though that sounds controversial, this might actually be a solution that garners bipartisan support. In a recent column, John Fund makes the case for term limits on the Supreme Court. When the Founding Fathers granted life tenure to Supreme Court justices, the average life expectancy was 38. Today it is more than twice that. Some of the justices in the past certainly stayed past their sell-by date. He argues that the Constitution in Article 3, Section 1 does say that judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean that they must serve for life. In fact, many federal judges retire on a fairly regular basis. The reform group, Fix the Court, has come up with a bipartisan proposal for 18-year term limits for the Supreme Court. It would stagger the terms so that a vacancy could come up every 2 years. That means every president could have 2 appointments in each term. One poll found that 6 in 10 registered voters favored Supreme Court term limits. Chief Justice John Roberts, appointed by George W. Bush, as well as Justice Stephen Breyer, appointed by Bill Clinton, have indicated support for the idea. This is a proposal worth debating. It will provide a more orderly transition for the Supreme Court and possibly lower the heat in the current confirmation battles. I think this is one proposal that might actually attract bipartisan support. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we have on the phone taxpayer advocate Dan Pilla, who has been working on these issues for taxpayers for decades now. We're working through his 9 principles that you should be aware of as we come to the end of the year. Dan, what is the review your wage withholding and estimated payments? A lot of people end up paying more than they need to in their withholding, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned just before the break, about 80%, plus or minus 80% of all Americans get a tax refund, Merrill, and they get the tax refund not because the government got religion and decided to give them free money. They get the tax refund because they paid too much to begin with. Now, last year, the average tax refund was about $3,200. So that means the typical family is paying about $270 or $280 a month in and month out, in taxes to the IRS that they don't owe. Now, why would you ever do that? They hold your money for over 12 months because, of course, you got to file your tax return in April, right? March or April. So they're holding your money for 14, 15 months, not paying you a nickel's worth of interest on that money. And so now they give it back, but by the time you get it back, you're 2 or 3 or 4 months into over withholding for the next year. So you're never square with them. When you're over withholding, you're never square. They always owe you money, and you're not getting the benefit of that money in any way. Why would you do that?
So let me play the devil's advocate here. Isn't there a penalty if I contribute, and so I'd have to end up paying a penalty?
Well, it depends on how much you under-contribute. There's the so-called 90%, 100% rule. What that means is you have to pay either 90% of your last year, of your current year's tax liability or 100% of last year's tax liability, whichever is less, and then you don't run into a penalty situation. I talk about this in my book, Dan Pilla, Small Business Tax Guide, because we talk about it in the context of estimated payments as well. But what happens is as long as you fall into that window, then there's no penalty. But here's the thing. Just because you the decision is not a simple yes or no. In other words, it's not a matter of I'm either going to get a refund or I'm going to owe them money. What you want to do is strive to be at what I call net zero. In other words, where the government doesn't owe you any money and you don't owe them any money. And there's a simple formula you can get to that will allow you to do the calculation to get to that point where when you file your return, you're basically even with the government, and that's where you want to be.
Speaking of owing the government money, your third point is count your money now, because sometimes people come up at the end of the year and they've got a tax liability they weren't counting on and they're not able to pay it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, it's not a small number either. Every year, about 3.5 million people end up delinquent with the IRS, and this is what starts the snowball down the mountain in terms of serious problems that people have with the IRS, where they end up facing wage levies, bank levies, tax liens, and property seizures. And, of course, this is the work that I've been doing for over 40 years, is helping people to minimize and eliminate all of those collection problems. But you need to sit down right now. If there's the slightest question in your mind about whether you're going to owe the IRS in April, sit down right now and figure out where you're at, because you do not want to be in a situation where you file your tax return in April and now you owe the IRS $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 or more in money that you can't pay. There are strategies you can use to keep the IRS at arm's length when you're in that kind of a situation. But if you're not aware of it and you don't understand what the strategies are, you're going to get run over by the IRS.
Your fourth point there has to do with financial gains from investments, because if I end up making an investment and I gain from it, I've got to pay taxes on that. If it's a long-term investment, I got to pay capital gains. But if I lose money on that, I don't necessarily get a chance to take that off my taxes.
Yeah, you're limited in what you can take off. So you're exactly right, Merrill. When you gain on an investment, your uninvested partner, the U.S. government, is standing there with its hand out, and they're wanting their share of your gains. But if you lose money, your deduction is limited. Basically, in a capital loss situation, you're limited to just $3,000 a year of the loss. So if you lost $10,000, you had a $10,000 loss, it's going to take you more than 3 years to recover that loss. So what you want to do is compare your portfolio, look at your portfolio, and do this with your financial advisor. Sit down and figure out if you've got gains in one area and losses in others. If you take your gains and losses in the same year, they can offset each other, and so that gets you a bigger deduction.
Your fifth point, you say consider making equipment purchases. Now, this would, of course, primarily be for could be small businesses, also large businesses, contractors, and others. But this was something from the tax law that passed in 2017. I can expense certain things immediately, certain business expenses, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Ordinarily, when you buy business equipment, that equipment has to be depreciated over the useful life of the equipment. So, for example, if you go out and buy a $15,000 copy machine, let's say, that's got a useful life of 3 years. Well, you got to spread that deduction over the 3 years, meaning you can't write off $15,000. You can only write off $5,000 a year for 3 years. But there's such a thing as the so-called 179 deduction. I talk about this in my book, Dan Pilla, Small Business Tax Guide. I talk about it extensively. The 179 deduction allows you to make an election to expense equipment in the year of the purchase that otherwise would have to be depreciated over time. So you can choose to expense that copy machine and claim the whole $15,000 in 1 year. Now, it's important to sit down and figure out where you're at with this, because if your business income is significantly up in 2019, maybe you want to claim the 179 to give yourself a bigger deduction. Whereas if your income is down in 2019, but you still need that copy machine, you can make the election to expense it over time so you don't burn up your deduction in a year that you might not need the whole thing. So it's a little bit of planning that goes involved here, but it's simple and it's easy to do with the right guidance, and the Small Business Tax Guide will walk you through that.
That was such an important point in the tax reform bill, because we knew people who had spent money on technology that was out of date within a year or two, but they were still having to take the depreciation for several years, even though they had already moved on to something else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this has been one of the congressional ping pong balls, Merrill, that's driven me crazy over the last really 25 years because, every time you got leftists in government, they want to take away the deductions for small businesses, and the 179 deduction is the first thing they target and say, oh, we're not giving businesses these loopholes, and they refer to it as a loophole, which is complete nonsense, but they refer to it that way, and so they want to, quote-unquote, take that away to make these evil businesses pay higher taxes. And then, and then when you get more rational people involved in Congress, well, then they want to put the 179 back into place, and so it goes back and forth and back and forth. And where we're at right now is a pretty significant 179 deduction, up to $1 million worth of equipment. I don't know how many people buy $1 million worth, but certainly medium and large businesses are going to do that. So you want to be aware of this deduction and how it works.
Your sixth point is something I've been talking about for a long time: is take advantage of the medical savings account or health savings account option.
Yeah, this is an important deduction because what it does is it gives you a dollar for dollar deduction for medical expenses that otherwise would be limited. Again, we're talking about that congressional ping pong ball. The deduction for medical expenses has been one of those things that's been bounced around a lot, and you know this as well as I do, Merrill, because you follow this very closely. The fact is, if Congress gave a rip, if the leftists gave a rip about your capacity to pay your medical bills, they would give you a full dollar for dollar deduction for your medical expenses, but instead they take it away. One thing that the Affordable Care Act did was it actually increased the threshold of from 7.5% to 10% of adjusted gross income before you could write off any of your medical expenses. So they made it even harder for people to write off their medical expenses. But this medical savings account is a very important thing because you take your money, you put it into a savings account, and then you can use that money to pay medical expenses and get a deduction for it, because what goes into the medical account, as long as it's a qualified medical savings account, you get a deduction for on the front end. And one of the things we've been pushing for is what's called a large health savings account, a large HSA, where the employer could just deposit the money in the in your HSA, and then you could take that money and go out and buy your own insurance policy someplace other than the employer. You could use the money to pay for the employer's policy. Or you may decide to go to a Christian sharing ministry, or simply say, I don't want to spend the money on health insurance right now, and use it for medical expenses. So we would like to see those expanded, but so far we haven't been able to convince Congress to do that. My guest for this hour, Dan Pilla, a taxpayer advocate, long time associated with Point of View, and has been providing excellent tax advice to our listeners for decades now. When we come back, we're going to go through the rest of these few points that he has for individuals, primarily for individuals. Then we'll look at the business tax out there, especially for small businesses. If you'd like to talk to Dan, 1-800-351-1212. We'll open up the lines, 1-800-351-1212. Give us a call, and we'll put you on with Dan Pilla, taxpayer advocate. We'll be back in just a minute.
When you give to Point of View, does it make a difference? Jeremy Dies would tell you that it does. He grew up listening to Point of View in the back seat of his mom's car, and it helped to shape his thinking.
I had parents that were able to sit across from me at the dinner table after we listened to Marlon Maddox and Kirby Anderson years ago and think through what the scriptures say about these issues of current significance in our lives. That's only possible because Point of View has come along and ministered into my life and made me who I am today. And here I am today defending religious liberty, partly because Marlon Maddox and Penn Dexter and Kirby Anderson were the ones that were pushing me towards all that. They taught me how to think through these issues. They didn't tell me what to think. They taught me how to think.
Each gift you give will change lives. Not every Point of View listener will become a Jeremy, but if they listen for very long, they will be changed. And that will change how they impact and affect the lives of the people around them. So make that decision to change a life today. Join the Truth Team and boldly stand for truth in a world of lies, distortion, and information manipulation. Go to pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby, and on the line with us today, Dan Pilla, longtime taxpayer advocate and a contributor to Point of View for years and years. He's provided taxpayer advice to our listeners. And Dan, we're talking about these the 9 points, simple points that you have for considering your tax planning at the end of the year. Your seventh one, fund a retirement account. I can't mention, I just can't emphasize how important that is for people to do that, even if they have a company defined benefit pension. They should be contributing to an IRA.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question about it. You put money in now, you get a deduction for it, you pull it out later on during your retirement, you pay the tax on it. Okay, fine. It's a way to defer, to kick the can, as it were, down the road when it comes to a certain amount of your income to support, beef up your retirement income during the years when you're not working. It's a very important strategy, and people need to look at it. And too many folks overlook it. I'll tell you, the other thing they overlook is the matching that their employer gives them with a 401k. So if your employer is going to match 2% or 4% or whatever it is, you're getting free money if you put that in. If you make your contribution and your employer matches it, that's free money to you. It doesn't go on your W-2. You don't pay taxes on it. You need to take advantage of that.
I'll just mention to our listeners, we have Dan's bio up on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. It also has a link to his website there, taxhelponline.com, taxhelponline.com. So go there if you want to find out more about Dan and his organization. Dan, your point number 8, consider restructuring your business. So this is something that you talk a little bit about in your Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide, but what do you mean by restructuring?
Well, I talk quite a bit about it in the Small Business Tax Guide, and what I mean about restructuring is most small businesses will start off as sole proprietorships, and they'll function as a sole proprietorship where Jenny's sewing shop or Bill's repair. I mean, whatever it is, right? You're just a small business person. Maybe it's a mom and pop operation, a husband and wife deal, and you set it up as a sole proprietorship. And okay, that's fine. That's all well and good for a small operation, but maybe it's time to look at a different structure for your business. Maybe you should be considering an LLC or an S corporation to restructure the entity status under which your company operates. A lot of times, Merrill, what happens is a person who's just started a small business will go down and sit down with a CPA or some kind of an accounting professional, and that person will just simply stuff the new business person into an entity, and that new business person doesn't understand how the entity functions and what the advantages and, most importantly, the disadvantages are of that particular entity. And a bigger problem is understanding what the compliance burdens are for a particular entity. In other words, how does a particular small business, whether it's an S corporation, an LLC, a partnership, a sole proprietorship, what do they have to do to stay in compliance with the IRS? This is one of the single biggest problems I see, Merrill, as a tax litigator, helping people solve IRS problems, is they're in the wrong business structure to begin with. It's not right for them. They just did it because someone told them to do it. They don't understand what they're doing, and they don't understand why they're in trouble with the IRS. So if you're a small business person, you need to take a careful look at that. And I've got a great deal of discussion on this subject in the Small Business Tax Guide because it is such a huge problem.
And your last point in the 9 simple things, this is one that's important to Point of View. Catch up with your charitable contributions. You get a tax deduction for charitable contributions. Point of View is one of those. What should people be considering on that?
Well, what you got to keep in mind with charitable contributions, first of all, now's the time to do it. So you get the deduction for 2019 when you make a charitable contribution in 2019. And so you want to look at your situation, and if you're tithing at 10% or you're going over the top, that's fine, that's great. But now's the time to take a look at it. But here's the important thing: when you make a contribution to any one organization, of $250 or more, you need to make sure that you get an acknowledgement. I know Point of View sends these out because I've seen them with my own eyes. The acknowledgement you get back from the organization that says you gave X amount of dollars and you didn't receive anything of economic value in return for your contribution. So in other words, if you give $200 to an organization and you get back, let's say you get back Pastor's new book that they say is worth $50. Well, you can't write off the value of the item you got in return. So that acknowledgement from the organization has got to state whether you got anything of value or not in return for your gift.
Let's go to Janet. She actually has been in several states. She has a question about what truck drivers can do from 2016. Janet, are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about last year. We got a total surprise when we did our taxes. My husband's a truck driver, and we always able to deduct, his expenses on the road, items that, are allowed to be able to be deducted. And then we found out in 2018 that they were no longer doing that. Now, owner-operators, because of their so much more of overhead expense, were able to, but company drivers, like little things that the drivers need, like personal items, bedding, shaving, things like that they have to get on the road, are no longer deductible.
Right. Yeah. Let me explain what happened for the listeners that might not be following us. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act eliminated the deduction for unreimbursed employee expenses. All right. So while the Jobs Act doubled the standard deduction for married people, it went from $12,500 to $24,000. So it's just about double. They eliminated the deduction for unreimbursed employee expenses. So if you're working for a company and you incur expenses the company doesn't reimburse, you can't write those off any longer. All right, but self-employed people, and this is important to understand, self-employed people still get 100% deduction for all of their necessary business expenses that are incurred for the purposes of earning income. I explain this at length in the Small Business Tax Guide, how that works and what constitutes a business expense and so on. In your situation where you're an employee, your husband's an employee, what you need to do is sit down with the company and see if they're willing to reimburse some of these expenses. So the company would still get a deduction for them as a business expense. It's just that you as the employee don't get the deduction.
Right. Yeah, like I said, it was a rude awakening. We were always able to deduct because, for everything that he has.
Sure.
And then we had the one that...
Janet, this gets back to one of the points in my list of 9 things, which is count your money now. All right, you need to sit down now and figure out where you're at so you don't get that surprise in April. And I'm telling you, it happens literally 3.5 million times a year. People like you prepare their tax returns in March or April, and then all of a sudden you're hit over the head with this giant tax bill you never expected, and now you're behind the 8 ball with the IRS. You don't want that to happen, so you need to sit down and figure out now where you're at, given your facts and circumstances.
Thank you, Janet, for calling. Dan, going back to your book, Dan Pilla's Small Business Tax Guide, the complete guide to organizing and operating your small business. I'm going to show it here to the audience so they can see it. Why did you decide to write this book?
Well, this book is actually, Merrill, this book has been 40 years in the making. As I said,
it's not that long for 40 years.
Well, here's what I mean by that. I've been fighting with the IRS on behalf of clients for 40 years, and it started with my father's business that went south and got shut down by the IRS, and his business got shut down over the question of employment taxes. He didn't pay employment taxes, and so he got into this flap with the IRS that cost him his business and would have cost him his house. All right, so ever since that time, I've been helping small business owners of every description fight with the IRS through audits and appeals and through tax court cases and through egregious collection problems where they owe, $40 or $50 or $140,000 or more. We deal with businesses that owe millions of dollars in taxes. And there's a common thread with all of these problems. Why are these people getting into trouble? It seems to fall into, 8 or 9 or 10 different areas. And so what I did after all this experience, 40 years of experience in fighting the IRS in these areas, I worked through all of these problems, and I describe in the Small Business Tax Guide what these problems are, how businesses get sideways with the IRS, and then most importantly, how to avoid it. So in every single one of these problem areas, I show you how the IRS attacks it and how to defend yourself from it, and most importantly, how to keep from getting in trouble in the first place. If you set yourself up right and you do the things properly on the front end, you won't get into these problems in the first place.
Dan, when we come back from the break, let's touch on a few of those. We've also got Detron from South Carolina who has a question about a small business. So stay with us. We'll be back with Dan Pilla to discuss these issues, especially on the Small Business Tax Guide. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back with Merrill Matthews and taxpayer advocate Dan Pilla. And Dan, let's go to Detron in South Carolina, who's got a very interesting question about his landscaping business. Detron, you're on the air.
Hey, how are you? I have a landscaping business, and I'm at the point where I have very old equipment, but I can repair it for a little bit of nothing by buying this little piece apart. But should I think about buying brand new stuff this year or buy it next year?
Well, that's a business decision, Ditron, that you have to make. If you need the equipment to function, you buy the equipment this year, you're going to get the deduction this year. The first question I would ask you is your 2019 income way up over 2018 to the point where you think you need more deductions to balance out your tax liability? If the answer is yes, buy the equipment. If the answer is no, that your income is about the same as it was in 2018 or maybe even less, then maybe don't buy the equipment. Wait until you see what happens in 2020. But that's a business decision you got to look at.
The thing that happened last year is I didn't buy any new equipment, and I didn't get any deductions. So I got nothing back. And whatever. So I just didn't get anything back. I actually owed just a little bit.
Dan, is the immediate expensing perpetual, or is that available for a limited time?
Well, there's some amount of Merrill that's perpetual, meaning that Code Section 179 has been on the books for a long time. What fluctuates is the ceiling. You know, it started out at $5,000, and then Congress pushed it to $25,000, and then it went back, and then up and back and up and back. And so right now it's at $1 million. We don't know what it's going to be if the House changes hands, if the Senate changes hands and the White House change hands, then I believe that $1 million deduction is going to go away. Is it going to go away completely or back to 5,000? Who knows? But it's there's nothing that's perpetual or fixed in stone, carved in stone when it comes to the tax laws, because as you know better than I do, when the control in Washington changes, the tax laws change.
Yeah. So depending upon how much he wants to spend, at least he's probably safe this year and probably next year. But it's all off on 2021. Who knows then?
Yeah, that's probably true. Yep.
Well, thank you, Detron. So, Dan, tell me some of the key issues that we should be thinking about for small businesses. You know, we talked about those for individuals. I'm going to show the book here again, Dan Pilla, Small Business Tax Guide. Tell us some of the key things that small businesses should be considering right now.
Well, let me tell you what got my father in trouble, all right? This is one of the key things that I talk about in the book, and that is understanding the difference between an employee and an independent contractor.
Ooh.
What happens here, Merrill, is the IRS has been at war with small businesses for as long as I've been in this business, the tax resolution business, over the question of who's an employee and who's an independent contractor. And what happens is small businesses often want to classify their workers as independent contractors because you got workforce flexibility. It's less expensive. You don't have to withhold. You don't have to pay insurance and so on. That's what got my father in trouble. He classified certain of his workers as independent contractors. The IRS came in and said, oh, no, they're not independent contractors. They're employees. Now you owe all these back taxes. And we're talking about $30,000 or $40,000 in the early 1970s, which was a huge amount of money by today's standards. All right, that's what put him out of business, and that's what it caused the IRS to padlock the doors. And it happens over and over and over again because business owners don't understand what the difference is between an employee and an independent contractor under the IRS's rules. So I break this down for you very simply and very clearly so you don't make the mistake that caused the IRS to padlock the doors on my father's business.
And that's a growing issue, isn't it? I mean, more and more people want flexibility, so they'd like to be independent contractors. They may hold several types of positions as independent contractors, but the government then comes in and says, no, we see this person is working a lot for you, and we think that person is really an employee, and you're just trying to scam the government by making it an independent contractor.
That's exactly right. You put your finger precisely on the problem. The IRS has never seen a worker that they believe is an independent contractor. They want everybody to be employees, Merrill, and they'll tell you why they want them to be employees. Because independent contractors don't operate under what the IRS calls the safety net of wage withholding. So when you as an independent contractor get paid by your company, they give you your whole check and you're responsible for your taxes. When you're an employee, guess what? You got the wage withholding, and it's, of course, as we know, it's over withholding in many cases. So the IRS gets the money, and that's why they hate independent contractors, and they hate businesses that use independent contractors because there's not the safety net of wage withholding involved.
But isn't it fair to say we're moving to a more mobile workforce where there's fewer employees, and companies increasingly like to work with independent contractors just because of that flexibility that allows that? And I guess my point here is a lot of independent contractors like being independent contractors.
No question about it. You're absolutely right. Workers want the independence, and companies want the independence, but the IRS does not. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't make any difference what titles you give to people. All right? I can call myself an independent contractor, but if I qualify under the rules of law to be an employee, it doesn't make any difference what I call myself. And this is what gets these companies trapped, is they don't understand the terminology and they don't understand the rules. There's a series of bright line rules that the IRS never explains, and I do explain in the book, so that you will never get caught in the problem that my father was caught in, 50 years ago.
Is one of those bright line rules the amount of time that the person works? If the independent contractor is there 40 hours a week, is that sort of a red flag to the IRS then?
No, it's not. That's not one of the rules.
Oh, really?
There's a lot of misunderstanding here. I'll tell you what the rule is. It boils down to one word, Merrill. It boils down to the question of control. All right? Who controls the workplace, the worker, and the manner in which the work is performed? If the worker controls those things, in other words, I perform my duties on my own terms with my own equipment, in my own space, on my own time, on my own schedule, then I'm independent. If the company controls those things, you're required to report at a certain place, you're required to spend a certain amount of time, you're required to do specific tasks under my direction, under the company's direction, then the company has control. That's the key factor, is control.
Oh, man. It is, our guest this hour has been Dan Pilla, taxpayer advocate, been in this business for over 40 years. He's recently published his Dan Pilla Small Business Tax Guide. So if you have a small business, you may want to, you can go to pointofview.net, go to our website. We've got a bio of Dan up there, so you can look at that and read more about him. Plus, it has a link to his website, taxhelponline.com, where you can, I assume they can sign up, Dan, for your, you do a regular sort of email about, I guess, a newsletter or something?
Yeah, absolutely. We have email blasts that go out, and we do have a newsletter called Pilla Talks Taxes, which is available for folks. They can get all the information right on my website. Go to pointofview.net and click the link.
Folks, take this tax issue seriously. You want to pay all your legal taxes, but you don't want to pay any more than you are absolutely legally required to. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to your taxes. I think many people, Dan, just sort of take that as a last-minute deal. They try to get, it's not something they deal with. They want to deal with it. It's a pain, and they just don't want to spend much time on it. But it is to your advantage to spend time on your taxes and figure out what you owe, and that you pay that legally, but that you don't pay any more than you should. So if you're interested in that, go to the pointofview.net. You can find out more about Dan. And when we come back, we're going to shift to another end-of-the-year issue, health insurance. We've got Beverly Gossage coming on to talk about those of you who are looking out, going to be involved in Obamacare. You need to make a decision here before the end of this week. We'll have Beverly Gossage on to talk about that and your options, both if you want to go that direction or if you want to go out and just buy your own insurance. So stay with us, and we'll come back and we'll be talking about health insurance here for the end of the year.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MetaShare MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. This is Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And we've got an exciting hour for us this time, because we're going to have Beverly Gossage on the phone with us. Beverly is a longtime friend. We've known each other for many years now. She's has 15 years experience as a health insurance agent, and she's the founder and president of HSA Benefits Consulting. Beverly and I bump into each other every now and then in policy conferences. That's not a health insurance policy, but it's the policy of health care conferences every now and then, and we've been talking for a number of years. Beverly, are you with us?
I am, Merrill. How nice to talk to you again.
Thank you so much for joining us. In the last hour, we spent an hour talking about tax issues, because we're coming up to the end of the year. And, of course, we're also we just passed open enrollment in Medicare. I think that ended on Saturday, but we still got another week for those who are who are looking at the Affordable Care Act, that is Obamacare. So I wanted to have you on just to talk a bit about the health insurance options that are out there for people, what they should be considering. And, of course, for our listeners, this is a really busy time for you, because this is the time that people make these decisions about open enrollment, if you're in Medicare, Obamacare, and other things. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm glad to be on the call. You're right. It is a very busy time. If D.C. were to listen to us, and sometimes they do, but they would change it to where, just as when you go into your state Department of Insurance, most states do it on your birthday. That's when you go in and you will renew your tags for your car. Mm-hmm. It would be lovely if on your birthday is when you renewed for your Medicare or your insurance plan, because as it is, everybody is jammed into the same 6 weeks.
Yes.
And so it just makes it very difficult to help everybody and get to everyone.
It does. You are licensed in about half the states to sell insurance, I believe, right?
I am.
So you have a lot of people contacting you. Now,
I do.
Medicare open enrollment just ended, but let's talk about that a little bit, because the statistic we used to hear was 10,000 baby boomers retire every day. So even though Medicare open enrollment has ended, an awful lot of people will be turning 65 over the next 2 or 3 or 4 months, and they're already getting information and contacts and so forth. What are the two? There are two major options. If you're turning 65 and you're going to go in Medicare, discuss the two major options that you have.
I'd be happy to. First of all, people need to realize that your schedule, the Part A and Part B, Part A only covers hospital. B, of course, covers most of all medical expenses beyond that, doctor's visits, outpatient hospital care, etc. However, it doesn't cover prescription drugs. So there are people that sign up for Part A because they're currently under an employer plan, and maybe they're required to if they work for a small business with fewer than 20 employees, or maybe they just decide they would because in most cases there's no charge for Part A because you've been paying into the program. And then when they come decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and join Part B and officially join Medicare, when they join Part B, there is an expense. And so for most people, if you make $85,000 or less or double that for a family, they'll pay about $146 a month. However, some people find, I have a higher income. My wife has a higher income. We're going to pay $500 for their Part B. So I get calls every day. Should I stay on my employer plan? Or even though I'm turning 65, I'm eligible for Medicare, but I don't intend to retire for another 5 or 6 or 8 years. Can I just stay on my employer plan? That's what I do, is sit down and let's just do the math and figure out how much you're going to have to pay for Part B. You might have an extra, they call it IRMA, an extra income amount that you'd have to pay for Part D. So adding all of those things up before going off your employer plan just because you turned 65. Since we have so many listeners, I'm sure, that are on an employer plan, I think that's important to note.
There's also Part D, though, too.
Right. So now we talked about Part A. When to sign up for Part B. You don't have to if you're on an employer plan. You could stay there, and that just postpones your initial signing up. Now, the question that you ask, if you have Part A and B, is there anything else you can do? Yes. One, you may add what I call 2 dinghies to your sailboat. Your sailboat has 2 sails, Part A and Part B. But it doesn't cover everything. There are holes into what it doesn't cover for Part B. It doesn't cover a $186 deductible. It doesn't cover 20% of the rest of the medical charges. A does cover hospital, but you have a $1,364 deductible every 90 days. It's not an annual deductible. And after you hit 90 days, then you start paying the per diem. That's about $364. So there are things that Medicare doesn't pick up. People would like to have another plan pick up. So adding 2 dinghies to that boat. One of those dinghies to help cover those medical expenses is called a supplement. And that Medicare supplement, that is the actual name for that plan, or some people call it a Medigap plan. Those are plans A through N. Some of those plans are being retired every so often. For January 1, the ones that are being retired are plans C and F. Now, these are not parts A and B. These are plans. So plans C and F will be retired, and so people are picking from the plans that are left in that alphabet soup. And those plans will pick up most of what Medicare doesn't pay for Part A and B. So Medicare pays first, then these plans pay second. Depending on where you live in the country, every state has different rules on those Medicare supplements, so they have different premiums. Yet a G is, if you get Plan G, a G is a G is a G. It doesn't matter if it's Mutual of Omaha, AARP United, or Pekin, or Aetna, or Humana. There are hundreds of those, and they're all identical. A Select G, however, is where the insurance company selects which 2 or 3 hospitals you're allowed to go to. So be careful when you think, oh, my G was a lot cheaper. Maybe you got a Select G, so be sure to ask about that. So that's what a supplement does. It picks up those medical expenses that Medicare doesn't cover. It only covers what Medicare covers. It doesn't cover things Medicare does not cover, and that's a supplement A through N. Now, yet, you're right. Part D is the drug plan. That's another dinghy, came out in January 1 of 2004, and that is going to cover prescription drugs. No, nothing that we've talked so far, Plan A or B, or the supplement, covers prescription drugs. So Part D, if you don't buy Part D when you're first eligible, like you first come off of an employer plan after you turn 65, or if you have an individual policy and you turn 65 and you're eligible, you will pay a fine. And that fine is about 33 cents per month, but it accumulates. You don't see that fine until you later decide you want to buy your Part D and realize, oh my, I've accumulated a fine of $20 a month. And that $20 a month goes with you the rest of your life.
Beverly, hold on.
As long as you have a Part D.
Hold that thought just a second. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking with Beverly Gossage as we talk about Medicare options right now, and not only traditional Medicare, but also Medicare Advantage plans. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Every time Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg enters a hospital, speculation surfaces concerning her health and future. She is a cancer survivor who has occasionally missed oral arguments. But she isn't about to step down because she and other liberals fear who would replace her. But there may be a reasonable solution to how presidents appoint justices to the Supreme Court. Perhaps it is time to consider term limits for the Supreme Court. Even though that sounds controversial, this might actually be a solution that garners bipartisan support. In a recent column, John Fund makes the case for term limits on the Supreme Court. When the Founding Fathers granted life tenure to Supreme Court justices, the average life expectancy was 38. Today it is more than twice that. Some of the justices in the past certainly stayed past their sell-by date. He argues that the Constitution in Article 3, Section 1 does say that judges shall hold their offices during good behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean that they must serve for life. In fact, many federal judges retire on a fairly regular basis. The reform group, Fix the Court, has come up with a bipartisan proposal for 18-year term limits for the Supreme Court. It would stagger the terms so that a vacancy could come up every 2 years. That means every president could have 2 appointments in each term. One poll found that 6 in 10 registered voters favored Supreme Court term limits. Chief Justice John Roberts, appointed by George W. Bush, as well as Justice Stephen Breyer, appointed by Bill Clinton, have indicated support for the idea. This is a proposal worth debating. It will provide a more orderly transition for the Supreme Court and possibly lower the heat in the current confirmation battles. I think this is one proposal that might actually attract bipartisan support. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. My guest this hour is Beverly Gossage. She is a health insurance agent licensed in nearly half the states, and we're talking about health insurance options here at the end of the year. We've been talking about Medicare. We're going to do a little bit more of that, and then we're going to talk about, for those of you who are individuals who are going out, want to buy your own policy, maybe an Obamacare, maybe a Christian sharing ministry or something. We'll talk about that as well. If you have a question for Beverly, 1-800-351-1212 is the number, 1-800-351-1212. Call and get on the line, and we'll come to you in a few minutes. Now, Beverly, when we broke off for the break, we were talking about some of the Medicare options, and you were mentioning some of the issues under Part D, the drug benefit.
Yes, that's right. So if you have a sailboat, you have 2 sails, A and B, it doesn't cover everything, so people like to add 2 dinghies. So that's one choice, is do I want to add these 2 dinghies? One is a supplement plan that we talked about, plans A through N, G being the most popular because it's the most comprehensive. And by the way, that G plan, depending on if you're male or female, they pay different prices, and your zip code, it could run you between $110 to $200 for a G plan, depending on what part of the country you live in. If then you buy the second dinghy, which would be your prescription drug plan, then again, you may have an IRMA, meaning that you might have to pay more for this plan added on to the actual cost of the premium. Most people pay nothing additional for that plan other than the premium that's given to you. So most of the time, those premiums can run anywhere from $15 up to $120 for a prescription drug plan. Again, depending on where you live in the country And then it has nothing to do with male or female. It has to do with zip code, and it also has to do with what drugs do you take. So caution when you're looking at a prescription drug plan. Look at that deductible. Remember, the deductible typically only applies to Tier 3, 4, and 5 drugs. Tier 1 and 2 are your generic and your preferred generic. So make sure that you're working with a licensed agent that is able to tell you and that knows the ins and outs of all of the different carriers in your area that are offering prescription drug plans. Because you might find one that's only $15 and say, oh, I want to go with that one. But then you discover when you look at your drugs and how they would be charged with this plan, one, maybe your pharmacy you like is not in network, so you'd have to pay more. Two, maybe they've considered your drug a Tier 3 drug, and that $435 deductible applies. So make sure that you're working with someone that can help you put in your drugs, see how those drugs compare from prescription drug plan to another prescription drug plan. You may want to pay more in premium, but pay a lot less monthly for your prescription drugs. You also may want to find out which of those medications is so expensive and see if maybe your doctor can prescribe an alternative that might be a lower cost with a prescription drug plan. So those are the two dingies, and that's choice one. Okay?
But we're talking about, if you're talking about Part B, and you could pay more for Part B if you have a higher income, you have Part D and a supplemental policy, you could be looking at a substantial amount of monthly money that you have to pay out, and if it's a husband and wife, it gets expensive.
It does. So if you are the average American and you, as a couple, make less than $170,000 a year, $175,000 a year, your Part B will run each of you about $146 a month. If you are buying a supplement, again, depending on what part of the country you're in, for each of you, for a Plan G, would run between $100 and $200 a month. And then if you bought a Part D, that could run between $120 a month, and we're not including the extra amount you would have to pay if you're not the average American and you make more money than that. So there are many times that I've worked with individuals and we do the math and I say, well, if you stayed on your employer plan, your employer is paying the majority of your premium. Now, granted, you have a $6,000 deductible, and the majority of your medical expenses would be paid. Your prescriptions would be low co-pays. So you have to add up how much am I paying in premium and how much would I pay in out-of-pocket and add those two together. There's a lot of math to be done, which is why you want to work with an agent that specializes in Medicare. Very important that somebody really knows this. Now, the first option to add something to A and B would be that supplement Part D duo. The other option you mentioned was the Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage plans are also called Part C. You know, we talked about Part A and B and then D. D doesn't necessarily stand for drugs, but it just coincidentally works out that way.
But it works.
It works. But Part C is also called Medicare Advantage. And how the Medicare Advantage plans work depends on the area that you're in. If you're in a metropolitan area, you might have 34 to 50 different Medicare Advantage plans to pick from. If you're, however, in a really rural area, I'm in Kansas, and so some of rural Kansas, they may only have 2, 3, 4. Some have 7 options. Still, you have choices. And so most Medicare Advantage plans are called MAPDs, Medicare Advantage Prescription Drug. They include the prescription drugs. And many of these are zero premium. So when you are talking about premium, yes, you still have your Part A and B, so you would still pay for B, but you would not have a premium for that supplement. You would not have a premium for that prescription drug plan. So you can see why the Medicare Advantage plans are so attractive. We are pushing 40% of seniors that have Medicare Advantage plans. So how they work is this. They don't charge you a premium. Many of them have very low deductible, if any, on that prescription drugs. And how do you pay for things? Well, you would pay small copays, and those copays would add up to a total out-of-pocket. Now, prescription drugs are completely separate from that total out-of-pocket, just like they are with the prescription drug plan. They are included, however, in the premium. So let's say I have a typical Medicare Advantage plan. I have zero premium. I may pay $5 to $10 when I see my primary care physician. I might pay $25 to $50 when I see a specialist. If I go into a hospital, I would have a per-day flat charge, usually up to 5 to 7 days. That could be anywhere from $250 to $500 per day that you're in the hospital. But again, you have a total maximum out-of-pocket, and that maximum out-of-pocket can run anywhere from $3,000 maximum out-of-pocket up to $5,500, $6,700 total out-of-pocket. Depends on the plan that you select. Now, again, this is a network of doctors, so you would want to be sure that your agent looks up your doctors and your provider network. Are the hospitals you like in the network? Are the doctors that you like in the network? In fact, in my area, there's a carrier that offers a policy that is only one hospital. But the hospital has several locations and very popular in the area, and then they have doctors that work with that hospital. So if you select their plan, they're like, hey, if you like that hospital and you like these doctors, $0 to see a primary care physician, only $25 to see a specialist, only $250 per day for just the first 4 days that you go into the hospital, and your total out-of-pocket for this plan is $3,000.
Beverly,
medications are very low premium. The copays, even $0 for most generics or preferred generics.
So it depends significantly on where you live and what you want. So generally between traditional Medicare and the Medicare Advantage, are you a little more, so it varies, so we'll say that up front, but are you a little more bullish on Medicare Advantage, or is your first sort of default traditional Medicare unless there's a good Medicare Advantage plan? Which one do you sort of lean towards?
Well, you know, that I'm glad you asked me that, because that's like saying, which red car do you think is the best? It all depends on who's buying that red car. It all depends on the person. So what I like to do is, when I'm working with a Medicare beneficiary, I like to sit down with them and talk about what's important to you. Do you like knowing that you have peace of mind, that I know that, hey, I'm paying quite a bit in premium, but I know all my medical stuff is going to be paid for, except for maybe a $185 deductible. If that's more important to you, then let's look at the supplement and the standalone prescription drug plan. But I'm happy to explain to you Medicare Advantage. What I'm on Medicare. What do I personally have? I have a Medicare Advantage plan. So I think Medicare Advantage plans are a great option for some people, and I would have to say the majority of what I write when I explain their options. Here's how much a supplement is for you. Here's how much it would be for your husband. Here's how much it is for a prescription drug plan. This one works best for your husband, as we've seen. Have to stay away from the term best.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to move over to Obamacare and look at traditional health insurance. 1-800-351-1212 if you're interested in calling in.
So when people first hear about Medi-Share, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Medi-Share members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Medi-Share, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kirby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson today. And on the line with me is Beverly Gossage, longtime health insurance agent. She's based out of Kansas, but she's licensed in nearly half of the states. So she has to deal with an awful lot of those regulations and restrictions that are based in the states. And we've been talking about Medicare and the choices for seniors who are going on to Medicare. Now we're going to turn to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Beverly, you and I have been involved in the policy debate for some time. Neither one of us are big fans of the Affordable Care Act, but it is the law right now. People have through this week, I believe, to make a decision. What should be people who are individuals out there, and this is primarily we're talking about individuals who go out and buy their own health insurance. They're not getting health insurance through their employer. They're under 65 and they're going out and buying their own health insurance policy through the exchanges or either off the exchange. What should people be considering if they're faced with that?
Well, you have basically three options. One option, of course, is what you called Obamacare, the ACA, the exchange, the marketplace, healthcare.gov. Mm-hmm. And for folks who are buying in there, the major consideration is your income. And they take into consideration the household income. So if you're buying a policy, premiums are based upon your age and your zip code. That's basically it. So, and tobacco use, but very small difference between a tobacco user and a non-tobacco user. Mm-hmm. So the first thing is, what is your zip code? And then what plans are available to you? And then what are you looking for? So when I have people, I help people on that every day. I'm licensed and certified to assist folks on the exchanges, as you said, in multiple states. The concern that people have is when they go there, they say, well, this is an $8,700 deductible. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. $8,300 deductible. And I said, I know, that's true. Is there a lower deductible? Well, what's your income? Because your income, that's why on there they ask you to fill out the application first. And people are like, but what if I don't want to apply for it? Because when you fill out the application first, then they can look to see if you would qualify based on your income. Then you're only going to see those, the income or the premiums that are assessed based upon your income. And in the silver plans, we have bronze and silver and gold and platinum. Mm-hmm. Very few platinums anymore. But in the silver category, if you make between 100 and 250% of the poverty level, you're going to see lower out-of-pocket. So that $8,300, $8,700 deductible plan or total out-of-pocket plan might be reduced to $4,000 for you. Or maybe a $4,000 deductible plan might be reduced to $400 for you. So that's why they ask you to apply first. And if you work with a good agent, they know how to go in and just view the plans first before you fill out the application, and they can toggle and look at that income. Here's why that's important. Once you fill out an application and you have entered an income, that's it. You would have to call healthcare.gov, tell them you want to destroy that application and you want to completely reapply and do it over again. Mm. And some people don't know what they make. And many people don't know what they make.
Sure.
Last year, yeah.
We were talking about a contractor earlier in the last hour for the IRS, and you may work 20 hours one week, 40 hours the next week, 80 hours the next week, and nothing the following week. So you don't always know what you're going to make.
And you have to estimate what you're going to make in 2020. And if you're wrong, in April of 2021, when they determine your income tax, you go to pay your income tax, and you have to file in order to get this tax subsidy. So when you file, they can say, well, wait a minute, your AGI, your adjusted gross income, is more than what you told us it was going to be because you were just trying to estimate. You weren't sure, especially people that get bonuses at the end of the year, and things like that. And they're like, oh, gosh, well, I went over. I get these phone calls, Merrill, and people will say, wait a minute, they're telling me I have to pay back $3,000 to the IRS. What? Well, did you ever call them when you got did you get a raise? Oh, I changed jobs. Well, there you go. You remember you were supposed to call and tell them you changed jobs so that they change your subsidy. But yes, you would have to pay that back.
Beverly, you and I have been a longtime supporter of high deductibles, but that was back in the 90s and the 2000s when a high deductible was $2,000, $2,500. Let's stress the point. $8,300 deductible.
Oh, I know.
$8,300 deductible, and that's per person. I mean, don't in families it sometimes
it's
double.
Per person.
So $16,000, and you got a deductible for the family.
Yes, sir.
And that's what Barack Obama called good insurance.
Oh, you know what's so sad? You and I were both writing papers and on interviews long before that bill was passed in 2010. And prior to that, I spent a lot of time showing people actual rates. I'm like, you're talking about this is horrible out here, and the private market is just terrible. I can tell you that in multiple states, children's policies were $25 and $30.
Yes.
And you also had young people you and I wrote papers about this.
Yes, we did. Had it published in The Hill or Forbes. I can't remember which one, but
nor do I. But there were young people's policies, 29, 30-year-olds paying $50, $52 a month. My son was that age when this was passed. Now, when I talk about past 2010, really it didn't go into effect, if you recall, to 2014. So premiums even at 2013 were not much different than that, $50, $55. My son's policy was $55. It's now $350. You see policies that were very, very inexpensive become extremely expensive. We'll talk about why about that in a moment. So even though people might get a subsidy, they're thrilled that their policy went down from $350 to $100 or maybe $75. But reality is that in most states, back in 2013, before this was passed, they could have easily found a policy with a lower deductible for $75. That's the sad thing. You know what I used the example, Merrill? It's like the government broke your leg and then wants you to thank them because they gave you a crutch. And then you're like, well, thank you for that, but I'm still not back to where I was before.
For those people who don't want to take that option, there is Christian sharing ministries out there. There's the short-term medical plans. We've got about 2.5 minutes left in this segment, but take a minute to talk about the Christian sharing ministries.
Happily. So the people who usually don't want to buy in the health insurance exchange are those people who don't get a subsidy at all. Their income is the average American and they don't get a subsidy. Or maybe their employer pays only for them and pays nothing for the dependents, way too expensive at work. They're looking for an alternative, and you don't get a subsidy no matter your income if your employer offers insurance to you. So these are the people looking at that. Christian sharing ministries, there are many to pick from. Liberty, Samaritan, MediShare, lots of them, even Sedera, a lot of different plans. All of those are not insurance, but they walk and talk and kind of feel like insurance. Mm-hmm. So the premiums are a lot lower. MediShare is probably the closest one to being sort of like insurance in that you have a network of doctors, you pay some co-pays, you pay a monthly premium. They automatically will pick up what the bill goes to MediShare. That feels and walks and talks more like insurance. The other ones, you pay and then you get reimbursed. So it feels very different. If you are in short-term medical plans, they don't cover pre-existing conditions. They don't cover medications. Most of them don't cover maternity. They don't cover chiropractic, and mental health. So there are folks who are like, I don't care. I take one medication. It's like $4. This would be great for me. Therefore, the premiums on those, in most cases, are going to be about half of what you would pay on the healthcare.gov. Mm-hmm. For some people, they may maybe save 30, 40, even 70%, depending on the plan that they select. Those deductibles are usually around $5,000. Some are $2,500. Some are $5,000 with the co-insurance up to an additional $5,000. They also have a network of doctors. But the difference between that and a sharing ministry, if you're going to a sharing ministry, it's just going to go, it's going to ongoing, and maybe you have an increase once a year, but you don't have to worry about it ending. Short-term medical plans, it depends on your state. Maybe they let you buy 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, even renew for up to 3 years. So you would have to totally start over once your short-term goes away. So that's the real quick Reader's Digest version. We can get into more of it after the break.
When we come back, we'll talk more with Beverly Gossage, health insurance agent, talking about your options in health insurance.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We're in our last segment with Beverly Gossage, a health insurance agent, a licensed in a number of states, and a longtime activist in just healthcare reform policy issues. If you want to know more about Beverly, you can go to pointofview.net. We have a bio of her up there, some more information about her. Plus, we have a link to her website, HSA Benefits Consulting, where you can find out more information, contact her, or anything else. Beverly, that's HSA Benefits Consulting. You and I have long been supporters of health savings accounts. We had Dan Pilla on in the earlier hour, where one of his tax suggestions is if you have access to a health savings account, you ought to take advantage of it. Tell us what you think about the benefits of HSAs.
Well, I was proud to have pioneered HSAs, so I'm happy to talk about those. Basically, when you talked about earlier, Merrill, that people had higher deductibles back then, back when HSAs were passed January 1 of 2004, a high deductible was considered $1,250.
Yes.
And so, we've come a long way since then. But I knew folks who had $2,500 deductibles, $5,000 deductibles, but the trade-off was that you had very low, I call them peanut premiums.
Mm-hmm.
It's because if you were willing to take the first $5,000 of risk, then the premium was extremely low. And so the difference in premium is what gave you those funds to put into your health savings accounts. Sadly, well-intentioned or not, what happened with the ACA is that when it was passed, it didn't just affect individual policies, it affected all policies.
Yes.
So that you had to include all of these features, whether you wanted them or not. Imagine going to buy a car and they included all these features, and you go, "Is how much? No, I don't want that, or that." And they're like, "Sorry, you have to have them, even if you don't think you're ever going to use these features." So by including all the features and by doing guaranteed issue, saying no longer matters how healthy you are, you can't get a healthy discount, and by saying everybody's going to get the same rate no matter what, then all the rates went way up. So even having a higher deductible, you still have a high premium that goes with it. So there's very little savings to put into the health savings account. There may be some, but nothing like it was before. We can talk about, if we have time, about some reforms that you and I are both working on that can make a difference with that. But as to health savings accounts, if you have a health savings account, any financial advisor, my son's a CFA, CFP, CPA, and he always tells all of his clients, be sure to put funds into your HSA before you do your IRA because it's triple tax advantaged. So not only does it come out when you put something in to the money, the distribution, when that comes out of the account for medical expenses, you don't have to pay any taxes on that. And also you get a financial advantage by contributing to your HSA because it is tax-free, that money going in, gives you that nice tax deduction and coming out. Then once you turn 65, it functions like an IRA. You can use it for whatever you like without having to pay additional taxes on that. You only pay tax on the money. And even if you use it for medical expenses after you turn 65, you still pay no tax on that money like you do with an IRA. So you want to start funding those as soon as you possibly can to the full extent that you're allowed to do that. Now, as to the reform, if you have a minute for me to talk about that.
Yes, that's where I was going to go next. What kind of reform should we be looking at?
Well, I really am a strong supporter of the Republican Study Committee, and I'm very pleased of the work they did. I was proud to be able to ask to testify before that committee. And what they're working on is giving people personal, customizable care. And the beauty about that is HSAs are included in that. So let me give an example. Imagine if everybody in the United States bought their own private portable plan that they could customize for only features that they need. Well, this is how it was in 1943, before employers started kind of taking over health insurance. Long story behind that I won't go into. The people bought their own policy. Many people today still do, but few when you consider the total number of Americans that have Medicare and Medicaid, TRICARE, VA, and then employer-sponsored health insurance. However, I've yet to talk to an employer that doesn't want out of offering group health insurance. They're tired of being in the insurance business. They want to just sell their widgets, hire their employees, pay them a fair wage, but people have grown accustomed to that. So imagine if we expand HSAs and say you can pay your premium out of your HSA. So if you buy a private portable policy, you can pay for the premium out of the funds you put into your HSA, so you get a tax deduction on that. The only way people get a tax deduction now is, one, they're self-employed, or two, they work through an employer that offers health insurance through the employer. That compensation dollar that is used to pay for that premium seems like you have a generous employer, but the truth of it is he's controlling a large portion of your compensation. It would be nice if the employer just gave those funds to you and let you determine how you're going to spend them, what plan you want to buy, not necessarily the plan the employer offers. Don't worry about every 4 years the average American change job, I lose my coverage. This way, just like with your auto insurance, that has nothing to do with your job. You pick the plan that you like with the features you want. You should be able to buy that plan. It should be a very reasonable rate. And your employer then could put money into your HSA and say, I'm not going to be in the insurance business anymore. I'm going to put money into your HSA. We would expand the amount that can go into the HSA, let the employee then put those funds to use, paying for his premium, paying for medical expenses, dental, vision, whatever it may be, but he can still keep that policy even if he leaves that employer. So it's just a different way of thinking about it. Think of insurance like you think of auto insurance, and there would be so many more carriers offering plans. I challenge anyone to try to name all of the auto insurance carriers today. Why are there so many? Because I are the customer. Today, your employer is the customer. You really don't have any say about it. Yes, if you're at a very large company, they might give you 1 or 2 options. But what if you had hundreds of options? Each carrier offering 20, 30 plans and 30, 40 carriers. Before the ACA was passed, my state of Kansas, we had 17 carriers in the individual market, even with group health insurance. On the neighboring state, Missouri had 25. Oklahoma had 27. So you have all of these states that had all these options, and now people are down to 2 carriers, 1 carrier, and each of them may offer 1 or 2 plans to pick from. So the first thing we would have to do is, in those federal regulations that have stifled the individual market, reopen that market again by allowing people to buy policies that only have features they want, get that healthy discount again, and be able to make sense of buying an individual policy that travels with you.
Beverly,
if you get an individual plan, it can go with you to another state as long as the carrier offers policies in that state.
And I'll add another analogy with auto insurance. When you have an accident, the auto insurance agent comes out, writes you a check, and you have the money, and you go out and make that decision. And I'd like to see health insurance work like that. My guest this hour has been Beverly Gossage. She is a licensed health insurance agent in Kansas, but she's licensed in a number of states, and we've been talking about your options available for health insurance. You can go to pointofview.net. You can find out more information about Beverly there, and you can find her, click to her website, HSA Benefits Consulting, and you can find out even more information there. Beverly, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Merrill. 2 other things. Please watch for Ted Cruz's new bill to come out on HSA reform, and go to Job Creators Network, which has some great ideas on healthcare reform.
Very good. Thank you, Beverly. And Point of View will be back tomorrow.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.